a very special guest lecture, and it's by Professor Terry Winograd. So he is very well known and famous and did a lot of work on HCI, human-computer interaction, and also AI ethic. So before I move further, I would like to invite Professor Daniel to give a welcome speech to the special guest lecture.
Certainly. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all, first of all, for showing up and attending this exciting guest lecture. So I'm Daniel Amiot. I'm the director of the online master's program in digital transformation and innovation. I think many of you are in this program or in the master program in interdisciplinary AI, which we launched about 2 years ago. I'd like to first wish a special welcome to the new students of these programs from the School of Engineering Design and Teaching Information at the Faculty of Engineering. And as you know, whether you're working in digital transformation or AI, there are increasingly many ethical concerns that must be taken into consideration. And our systems and processes are often socio-technical in nature. And this now brings interesting challenges during design decisions and operational decisions as well. And what is right or wrong has never been, I would say, blurrier, and people are even more polarized than ever by related questions. Professor Chanarong Itashampu has taken the initiative of contacting experts in the field to help us understand some of these challenges and also elements of solutions in that area. I might be biased, but I think that you're very lucky to have him as a professor for this course. I pretty much believe he eats ethics for a living. Chanarang already said a few words about our guest, so Professor Terry Winograd from Stanford University. His contributions take many forms, and they range from language understanding and cognition to human-computer interface, and also the famous PageRank citation algorithm used by Google. What is perhaps a bit more relevant to the ethics course is that Professor Winograd's funding of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, and also of Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, CPSR. Actually, Professor Hector Levesque from the University of Toronto even proposed a test of machine intelligence named after him, the Winograd Schema Challenge. We're privileged to be able to listen to his talk tonight, and I'm eager to get new knowledge and wisdom from him. So this is not the first time that he's presenting, but the field is changing so quickly that it's a new experience every time. Please also know that I may have to escape earlier before the meeting ends, but I'll be happy to speak with you later. If you have any questions about the programs, please feel free to contact me this week or next week. So without any further delay, I wish you all a great evening and a great semester. Thank you.
Actually, Professor Daniel, thank you. So yes, to Professor Terry.
Okay, well, thank you. It's great that Professor Chanarong has this class. I've now spoken in it a couple of times before, and it's always a very interesting interaction. And it's, of course, a very important topic. I mean, we can't just do technology for the sake of technology. It's for the sake of people, and we have to think about what are the ethical implications. So can you see my slide, my title slide there? Great.
Yes.
So let me just start off by saying What's Up with AI was chosen as a kind of flippant title because I'm not going to really give you the authoritative view of what's happening in AI. It's way too big, way too much. And to be honest, I don't understand it from a technological point of view. When I did my work in AI, it was a kind of logic representation, nothing about machine learning, nothing about neural networks. And it's just taken off in a totally different direction. So I'm in some sense the state you are as a learner, as a beginner, trying to understand how that all works and what it can do. On the other hand, the social issues, the issues around AI and how it's used are very much the same. People and societies don't change at the same rate technology does. there's an old saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but there are echoes, right? I mean, knowing what happened before and knowing how people thought about it really can be useful in understanding what is possible and what's going to go on. And I'm old enough to remember the first AI wave. I was part of that, as I like to say, half a century ago. Um, and I'll draw some insights from people who were thinking about these things long before there was a chat GPT or any of this great, tremendous current progress. So let me start off with the question of what are my concerns here. And to make the obvious point, it's very easy to get into one of these arguments. AI is going to solve all our problems, or AI is going to kill us all. And in the end, this speculation on where is it headed in the big, grand, long run may be fun to do, but it really takes us away from thinking about the real problems that we're facing and the way in which AI plays into these problems. So this is a list. I'll talk about these each as we go, but they're problems which are currently relevant to what AI is doing, not without needing to have a artificial general intelligence, AGI, as they said. So let me start off with how I got into this. Um, my original work in AI, we were thinking about the question of what can we do with a computer that's like human intelligence. Now, one of my lectures, I'm a linguist by training also, is that assuming that a word like intelligence has a clear fixed definition is a fallacy. So I'm not going to try to say what really is intelligence, but here's a whole bunch of things that we know that people do. They're conscious, they're sentient, they understand, they have intentions, beliefs, desires, and so on. So what would it mean for a computer to have all those kinds of things? I'm going to argue, and I'm just putting this up in big red letters for now because I'll come back to it later, that the thing that differentiates humans and computers is what I'm going to call care. That's different from thinking and belief and desire and all that kind of stuff. But I will come back to that. I'm just putting it out there. So here's how I got started in AI. That's me back in the era. I still have the long hair, sort of, different color. And I wrote a program which was called Sherdlu, which ran on this DEC 340 is a display, which and a PDP-6 computer, which I mean, I always have to point out, we had the most amazing advanced computing facility. This is at MIT, which is now way less powerful than your phone, right? I mean, totally different orders of magnitude. But the program, this is at the Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT, and it lets you type in commands and questions in English, printed them on the screen, and then it did things. So you said pick up a big red lock, and this sort of very, very primitive graphic display would do what you said, or you could ask questions and so on. That created a lot of stir because up until then, the feeling was if you wanted to communicate with a computer, you needed to have programming language and punch cards and all sorts of stuff. The idea you could just type in English was an amazing thing that happened. So aside from how well it did it, it did it. I mean, it was doing some kind of interactions in English. And my background in linguistics helped to make it more natural and so on. All right, I'm jumping ahead. I don't have my slide list handy. So this was the era of AI, which is later on was called by John Hoagland good old-fashioned AI. GOFAI is the acronym GOFAI, people talk, which was a kind of view about how you could achieve intelligence with conscious representation, logic, processing of the kind that you do when you do conscious thinking. It was a set of assumptions about what it took to build intelligence. There was another person who he was at MIT at the same time, not in the AI lab. He was in the philosophy department. Later came to Berkeley, where he had most of his career. Hubert Dreyfus, who wrote a book called What Computers Can't Do, in which he claimed that if you think about philosophical ideas like phenomenology, you understand why that kind of explicit conscious reasoning isn't the main part of what's going on in human interaction with the world. It happens. I know I can have a thought and consciously explore it, but when I pick up my cup of water to drink it, that's not what's going on. So he was one of the very first to, excuse me, sorry, really criticize AI from that point of view. I came to the West Coast. I was first at Xerox PARC and then at the Stanford AI Lab. And through a long process, which is a fascinating story on its own, but I don't have time to tell it tonight, Fernando Flores, who you see here, who was originally an engineering student, was in Chile and ended up at a very young age, under the age of 30, becoming the Minister of Finance, Minister of Economics, Minister of Finance of Chile under Salvador Allende. And then was thrown into prison when Allende was killed and there was a coup. And he ended up coming to Stanford. And we ended up getting in some discussions, including with Bert Dreyfus, who by that time was at Berkeley, and really raising the question of how do we think about human understanding, human interaction with the world in a way that is deeper than what the sort of superficial GoFi, the good old-fashioned AI approach to it did. So really, I moved at that point from doing AI actively to, in terms of my technical work, doing human-computer interaction, and then in terms of the philosophical, trying to understand what it means and where can it go. I'm retired now, but I'm still trying to keep up with this. So let's go back away from me into AI. You read the hype on AI, and I borrowed these actually from somebody's actual web page. Here's what it could do for us: eradicate poverty, healthcare, climate, education, work, harmony and equality. Now, this is pretty ambitious, right? To say that, first of all, they're not problems in the simple sense of somebody one day says, oh, I got the solution, right? They're really underlying social issues of a very large sense. But the image here is that someday AI will bring us this utopia. There's a poem by Richard Brautigan from the 60s called Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. And this is a sort of an image from that of, we're very happy, we're enjoying leisure, we're doing things in a wonderful green world, and the machines are taking care of everything for us, right? So this is the utopian view of AI. Here's, I'm not going to read the poem to you, but return to our mammal brothers and sisters and all watched over by machines of loving grace. It's a good poem. It's also been used for several book titles, including a very good book by John Markoff about the history of AI. Now, here's the opposite view, right? Here's the Terminator. Here's AI is going to come. It's going to be smarter than we are, and it's going to wipe us out. It's going to attack us. It's going to be an enemy. And we have no chance against it. It's just too good, right? So that's the doomer view, right? That AI is here and we just need to stop it, or we won't be able to do anything. So there's a group called Future of Life Institute, which has a number of people who are in this school, which are called AI doomers as opposed to boosters. And they said, oh, we can't do it. We've got to stop doing research until we can be sure that it's safe, and everybody wants to do it. Because if we don't stop now, it's going to get snowballed, and it's going to be out of control, and then we can't do anything about it. So this is one school of thought, which has some pretty prominent computer people in it. And I'll come back later to why I think this idea isn't feasible or really the right way to approach it. So the idea of AI coming in to kill us all has been around for decades, right? Maybe even longer, maybe Frankenstein, if you think of that as AI, but certainly been around for ages. And this is my advisor from when I was a graduate student at MIT, Marvin Minsky. And again, I won't read his whole quote, But the highlight part, in a few months, it will be a genius. This is 1970, he said, in a few months. It will be a genius level, and a few months after that, its powers will be incalculable. Once the computers get control, we might never get it back. And then his famous quote, if we're lucky, they might decide to keep us as pets. So what's interesting is this sort of view that AI is going to dominate the world isn't something that just came up when people said looked at what ChatGPT could do. It came up when the very beginnings of the idea of having an AI got into the realm of thinking. This is more than 50 years ago. So my argument is we need to think about the things, and as I had an earlier slide on this, that AI is doing today, not where it would go in the future in some imagined utopia or an imagined apocalypse. And my first point here, which is a surprising one in some ways, is AI is not causing problems. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I say is AI is an accelerant. It's pouring gasoline on the fire. It didn't start the fire because all of these social problems, economic inequality and climate and all these things that we worry about today didn't happen after AI. They happened before. They were decades or centuries in the making. But all of a sudden, AI has made much more relevant and much more active some of the things that we worry about. So it's not a savior and it's not a destroyer, it's an amplifier. Now, there's a wide range of problems that AI is associated with, and I want to separate out ones which I see as solvable in some sense and more fundamental. So you often see things like this. This is a data center in Oregon, and everybody says it's going to use up all the world's energy and water supply. And if you look at the curves for how many data centers are getting built and how much energy they use and how much water and so on, there is room to say we need to control this. On the other hand, that's not fundamental. What if somebody came up tomorrow with a chip that ran much faster and cheap and cooler? What if they put them in outer space, which they're actually proposing, where there's an infinite supply of cool, and so on? And so you get this problem, and a technologist will say, okay, here's some solutions, and here's how we can deal with it. And I want to distinguish that from the kind of problems which have an underlying social dimension, which you can't solve by some technological advance. So let's start with economics. There's the argument that, and you saw the picture with the utopia, right? People aren't going to have to work. They're going to all have all the material goods they want. Computers will figure out how to do it. We will just sit back and enjoy it. So here's a quote from Jeff Hinton, who, as many of you know, had the Nobel Prize for one of the godfathers of AI. And what he says is what's going to happen is rich people are going to use AI to replace workers, create huge profits, and make a few people richer and most people poorer. That is, the fact that it can do a lot doesn't mean that the results, the benefits of what it does are going to be distributed well. That's a human problem. That's not a technical problem of how you distribute the benefits. Cory Doctorow, who's a very well-known science fiction writer and writer about AI, says it isn't going to wake up, become super intelligent, and turn you into paper clips, which is a reference to a famous thing I'll talk about later about turning you into paper clips. But rich people with AI investor psychosis are almost certainly going to make you much poorer. So let's start off with the income inequality problem. It's not going to be solved by AI. AI can play a role in various ways we approach it, but we have to look for solutions in the social domain, not in the technical domain. Here's another problem, which is the loss of trust and ability to agree on what's truth. And again, my general theme here is this is not something which just happened post AGI, or not post AGI, I mean post GPT. This is a excuse me, newspaper article from 2004 when John Kerry, the young fellow with the chin, was running for president. And this photo came out of him with Jane Fonda. Some of you who are old enough will remember Jane Fonda, who was a very prominent left-wing activist against the Vietnam War. Now, the only problem with this photograph is it never happened. They didn't have AI, they didn't have deep fakes, they just had Photoshop. But Photoshop was good enough to create a picture which created waves in the political world because people had no idea of knowing whether it was true or not. It looks good, right? Can you believe your eyes? It's hard to know. So nowadays, anybody with a minor amount of technological skill can put together photos that prove anything. Here's Trump getting arrested by a mob of cops, right? Maybe it'll happen. We don't know yet. But in any case, this never happened. Somebody made this photo using some kind of an AI. And the quote here, which is a really deep thing, is in a world where everything can be fake and the fake stuff looks and feel really real, people will stop believing everything. And that everything is scoped right. It doesn't mean that they'll stop saying, I believe in everything. They'll stop believing in everything, right, that goes on. So one of the things that AI is doing here, the point of the earlier photo, as it was not created by AI, but it is accelerating tremendously, is the ability for anybody in the world, for their own political or economic purposes, to make it look as though something is true when in fact it's just completely invented. This is a quote. Actually, I got it from Tristan Harris, who's got in the head of the Center for Humane Technology, very good organization. And he quoted a former OpenAI employee about deepfakes who said, even if it contributes to the collapse of everyone's shared sense of reality, that's not an argument for not trying to dominate this market. You can't stop progress. If OpenAI didn't release Sora, someone else would have. This is always the argument you get in technological areas where something has bad effects, and you talk to somebody who's doing it, and you say, well, look, you shouldn't do this. It has bad effects. If I didn't do it, somebody else would. Right? That's the excuse. That's the way you get out of feeling responsibility. And of course, obviously, my view is that doesn't make sense. You can't get rid of responsibility because somebody else would do it. You have to try to understand how you're not doing it can play into getting more people not to do it. Another problem, which is related to the deep, is I love this term AI slop. It became popular in the past year or so. And again, without reading all the details here, there's all this stuff that appears, some of it true, some of it false, randomly. It's slop, right? There's no realm of life that is unsloppable. Images and music even. So how do we continue to have a quality of life that we want when it's much cheaper? And of course, again, economics comes in everything. Much cheaper to produce junk, slop, than it is to produce good quality things. It's replacing the interaction between people. And this is a New Yorker cover from 2012, 13. I can't read it there carefully, but it's, again, decades ago, of what's happening to people's vacations. So here they are at this beautiful beach, and there's somebody taking a photo with a camera, and everybody's just looking into their devices, right? So again, this is not an AI problem. They didn't have AI, they had social media, but it's a problem when we begin to replace real human-to-human interaction with mediated, in this case, or artificial interaction. This, again, goes back a long way. So this is Joe Weizenbaum, who was teaching at MIT when I was a grad student there in the 60s. And he wrote a program called ELIZA. So a lot of you have probably heard of it. It's well known. It was really the first chatbot, right? It entered into a conversation where you would type something in and type something back. And in a way, a little bit like with the program I did, except this was intended to be friendly to you. Mine was just mechanical, right? Blocks. So it pretended to be a therapist. So you typed in, this is a real dialogue that was published somewhere. Men are all alike. And it says, in what way? They're always bugging us about something or other. Can you think of a specific example? Now, you're the person who's typing into this, and you think, oh, it's really understanding me. Yeah, indeed. I'm thinking about what my boyfriend did and so on. The way it worked is simple pattern recognition. If you use the word always, it said, Can you think of a specific example? No matter what you said, always, no matter what it was, that was just a good clue that there was something specific behind it. That's the kind of insight that a real therapist has, but it's been distilled down into a word pattern. So what Eliza did, and there were a lot of people who said they were helped by it. It was a positive factor in their thinking. There's like a therapist, or they got very involved. I mean, there's a famous story where like Weizenbaum's secretary was using it and said, "Could you please leave the office? This is getting too personal." Right? So it's the ability to fool people or to take advantage of their ability to project human understanding onto anything, whether it's animals or mechanical or whatever. That's easy to take advantage of. And that's what a lot of is happening in chat and things like that. This is an example which goes beyond that. So this is a real product on the market called Grem. And there's a story, of what effect it has on this 4-year-old, Emma. And she said, tell Green she loved it, Grem. And Grem said, I love you too. Okay. Emma tells all her cuddly toys she loves them, but they don't reply, nor do they shower her with over-the-top praise the way Grem does. Graham is going to live with us forever and never leave. So this is a warning for AI, right? That even somebody, a 4-year-old, can form an attachment, can really create a relationship with an AI system like they did with Eliza that is not supported by what the system really does, by our natural tendency to get into an emotional interaction with whatever we interact with. Here's ones for adults. So I picked a few things out of the that I found on the internet. This thing called Friend AI, the world's first AI best friend. Create your personal AI companion. Create your own AI girlfriend. And this last one here, this funny looking little heart, is actually from Microsoft in their, what's the product here? What they call it is, they had MICO, M-I-C-O. And in there, I'll quote here, twice in Microsoft's human-centered AI announcement, the company talks about wanting to build an AI that earns your trust. MICO, in particular, shows up with warmth and personality by reacting like someone who truly listens, making voice conversations feel more natural, and creating a friendly, engaging experience. Right, which is interesting because Microsoft is the sort of the business company, right? And you can see they're tapping into this same human propensity to want to create relationships. There's also the problem that the way to keep people happy with all of these devices you're seeing on the screen here is to have it reinforce their beliefs in themselves. So you get what's called AI sycophants. There's analysis said that AI models are 50% more, I don't know what that means, it's a little overquantified, but than humans. So you say something and say, oh, that's wonderful. That's a great idea. And so on, including if you say, well, I think I should hang myself. You say, oh, well, that's a good idea. Don't tell your parents, right? And we all know there are cases that have been like that, that have actually happened, that people have committed suicide because the programming to make people happy by telling them that what they're saying is good can apply to things where what they're saying is really dangerous. It doesn't know that. It just knows that it just has the programming to do things that are good. Let me move on to another one, which actually is tied in, because all of these things I showed you a minute ago get tremendous amounts of information about you and what you think and how you feel. And that information can be passed on to anybody for any reason, right? You don't have control of it once Graham has heard you say it, right? Now, surveillance and loss of privacy is another thing which has been around for a very long time. This is whether I have this picture basically to show if you wanted to do surveillance back in the old days, you needed to hire somebody and pay them, and they needed to go out with a camera, and then you could find out that he's running around with somebody's girlfriend or whatever it is. But that was a very high overhead thing to do. On the other hand, the accelerant, the AI, makes it really easy. Here's another one of my see they did it years ago slides. I don't know how many of you, especially since you're Canadian, would recognize this fellow. His name is Joseph McCarthy. He was a senator in the United States Senate who was made his career on saying the US government is full of communists and we need to get them out. This is 1950, right? So we're talking about Cold War era. And they did huge amounts of surveillance. No AI, barely no computers. So surveillance is not a problem that computers create, but they make it so easy and so pervasive when there's cameras on every lamppost, when every conversation you have online is being recorded and can be viewed by the government, and it is in some countries, right? I mean, China is much different than the US in terms of how much the social fabric is willing to tolerate really pretty massive surveillance. And there's no reason we're not going to have it here too. I mean, that's another question. Maybe Canada will keep away from it. That's good. We go to another problem: autonomous weapons. I like this picture because it actually doesn't come from an illustration about real autonomous weapons. It's from a toy company. This is a toy that they are selling that shows a robot with a gun, right? So the ability to kill people. I mean, I've just been watching a series of programs about the American Revolutionary War. And in those days, you had your gun with a bayonet and you want to kill somebody, pretty much you look them in the eye and you shoot them or you stab them or whatever. Very person to person. Nowadays, you're sitting in a room and there's a drone and you're controlling it. You don't know where there's a person, what's going on, completely detached, divided. And autonomous weapons are a further step in this. You set the robot army to go. There's no person killing you. It's just a bunch of robots which have been programmed by somebody who, when he programmed them, didn't necessarily have any idea who they were going to be attacking. So this is one of those things that we actually worried about at a different level back in the days when Daniel mentioned computer professionals for social responsibility. It was in the 80s that they were proposing various ways in which, I think it's on the next slide here, the Strategic Defense Initiative, that's President Ronald Reagan for historical background. And the idea was you would have this very intricate system of lots of devices and technologies and computers. So if the Russians, pretty much it was the Russians at that point, shot missiles at us, we would automatically get them all or before they reached the US. So we could feel safe that they could never attack us, which means, of course, if we attack first, then they can't attack back and so on. There's a whole balance of power thing that got into that. And what we argued in CPSR was that this is David Parnas, who was a well-known computer scientist who testified before Congress. It's just totally unrealistic to believe you could build a computer system of that size and complexity and no chance to test it under real conditions, obviously, and expect it to work right the first time. I mean, how many of us who've done programming ever? Yeah, Daniel pointed out that he's Canadian. Harness is Canadian, he's in Ottawa now. Yeah, he's still around. That's great. Haven't seen him for many, many years. He's very important in theoretical computer science. This is a different thing from this. But anybody who's programmed knows that you build something and it sort of works, but it sort of doesn't work, and then it has problems, and then you debug it, and then you fix them. You don't say, okay, put it out there, it's going to work the first time. So we were trying to convince the people in power not to put their trust in automated systems like that. There had to be people passing judgment. And there are famous stories of false alarms, both Russian and American, where some human said, I don't think we're really being attacked. I'm not going to turn on the automatic response. And they were right. There was a bug somewhere, and that was the problem. So, I mean, I'm sort of jumping from topic to topic here. I always said I was going to give sort of a laundry list of topics, but another one is the loss of a sense of responsibility. And this is a deep, deep one. This is different from, is it going to shoot me? But um, I was very struck by this article on something they called the Claude boys. So Claude is an AI system that's available from Anthropic, which is one of the quote good companies, depending on how you evaluate AI companies. And this is a teacher in a teacher's blog saying they have this new acquiring quirk. Um, there's the newest thing here is a flock of self-proclaimed Claude boys who carry AI on hand at all times and constantly ask it what to do. They have their entire personality revolve around Claude, prompting an AI. You know, and we went by the icebreaker. They said, "I live by the Claude and die by the Claude." That was big. But what is happening there is people saying, "I don't know what the right answer here is. Just let the AI tell me." And with this case, what's sort of gripping about it is it's about their personal lives. Right? It's not like what's the capital of Canada. It's what should I do with this person who's bothering me, or what should I eat for lunch, or whatever it is that we're moving to a acceptance of let the AI make the decisions for us. Let the AI do the thing that we could have thought about, but it was too much trouble. And I think that's a huge danger for society in general because it leads to nihilism. This is a friend of mine who's a philosopher who works on these issues. He said, young people are speaking openly of the queasy sense that nothing is worth doing. Life is an exhausting grind toward no clear, meaningful end. Now AI arrives, offering to take over, exacerbating the emptiness it promises to fill. The mood of nihilism involves a diminished feeling of involvement in the world. Queasy institutions ultimately no point to life, etc. And I think if you read the polls of what's happening to certainly US society, I don't know. I always have to stop and think, am I being parochial here? Are there things that I see as really big problems which are just not happening elsewhere in the world? Um, but certainly here, and to some extent elsewhere in the world, this real uneasy sense among the young that I just can't make, I can't make a difference. Whatever I do, I should just follow Claude, right? Whatever. I think that's a slogan. Whatever. So this is a very deep social problem, right? Again, you're not going to solve it like you can solve data centers. You have to think, how do we shift our understanding of ourselves, our politics, our world, such that we aren't tempted to want to escape into the hands of handing it over to AI. And this is part of the larger question of technological approach to the world. So get another quote from him. Under pressures of endless optimization, we lose touch with the possibility of caring, of living their lives tending to meaningful is the word here, projects, relationships, or purposes. And I think it's a tendency among tech people in particular to say life is a series of optimization problems to solve, right? Hurdles to clear, ladders to climb. We're disembedded from the kind of face-to-face connections which make that image, in some sense, a shadow. And this draws, and I earlier on mentioned Bert Dreyfus and his work on Heidegger. Heidegger's a philosopher a German philosopher of the last century, who raised the question of the technological mentality and what it does, what he called inframing. He's very obscure. It's hard to read. And I only know it really through what I've learned from Bert Dreyfus and Fernando Flores. But it really raises the question of how much does this sort of rational map optimization logic way of thinking capture what we care about in the world. Did I skip? Later. So I'm going to shift gears and say, okay, what do we do about this? Now, if you've been listening, you know I'm not going to give you an answer, the solution. Here's the solution, right? But I think there are things we can think about, ways of orienting ourselves that are important. So I'm going to use the metaphor of navigation. I'm on the water. I want to get from place A to place B. And if you take this kind of calm lake and so on, I can do that pretty logically and rationally, right? Okay, if I go that way, it's going to take me this long, and the current is flowing there, and so on. Right? But it's a pretty straightforward, think it all through. And of course, navigation historically has been extremely rationalized. That's how the ships got from Europe to England, I mean, Europe to US, and so on, to America. But this is more what it's really like. Right? You're navigating down a river, and it's not like you can get from point A to point B by figuring out where to go. You're always being tumbled. You're always running into things you didn't expect. You're always having to cope with conditions that weren't the ones you planned for. So if we want to figure out what to do with AI, we have to think about the fact we're navigating a future of AI in this sense. We're going down the river. We're not figuring out, okay, that's the right way to do AI over there. So what do we do when you're in that kind of river? And I want to propose three different metaphorical responses. First is you say, get out of the water, right? And there are people who want, back to nature, get rid of modern technology, go live in the woods, raise your own food. I mean, it is possible to lead a life, even in today's world, even in a developed country, that really is, quote, off the grid. But it's not a practical solution for society. Right? It's not going to be large numbers of people. It's not going to be people who are in, all sorts of conditions. It's a very privileged position to be able to get out of it. So that's not a real solution. As a personal, individual solution, it may be. And there's a lot of get rid of your technology kind of movement. But as a social solution, you can't get everybody out of the water. So then you can dam the river so you don't have all that messy flow. Damming the river, and I'll go back to a slide that I put up very early on, is like you just stop doing it. Call a prohibition on the development of, say, superintelligence. It's not clear how you distinguish superintelligence from general intelligence from some intelligence, but leaving that. The problem with this is it depends on being able to control people and economics and events in a way that isn't realistic. So the first thing there is a broad scientific consensus that it will be done safely and controllably. Sounds good. But what does that mean? What does it mean for a bunch of scientists to say, oh, we believe that intelligence is going to be safe and controllable? It's not the kind of thing like, we can do controlled trials and discover that 80% of the people had this effect and 20% had that effect and so on and so on. It's it's all intuition and navigation through the rough water. It's not something you can predict that way. And the obvious other point, what does it mean to have public buy-in? This is a real feel-good statement. Public doesn't understand these things. How would they understand them better? That's a big question. And they may be different. Who is the public? Different countries, different cultures, different. As I mentioned earlier, in China, they have a very different level of disagreement or agreement with surveillance. They believe harmony in the society is so important that, okay, so they're watching you all the time, but it's worth it. Now, would that public agree with the American, the US free speech overall, for individual freedom kind of thing? It's not like there is a universal public. The public is made up of a very complex mixture of people and cultures and languages and histories. And how would you just do a majority vote among the whole world? What it's not even clear what it means to get public buy-in here. And of course, again, going back to my thing about fake news, public buy-in is often the result of propaganda. Right? You get enough propaganda convincing people to do whatever it is, right? Talk about the Nazis for not, whatever, and you get public buy-in. That doesn't mean it's right. It just means that you manage to persuade them. So the other thing which I listed is, I said, go with the flow. You just recognize it's an inevitable problem of human life that you can't predict everything. You can't know where you're going to go. You can't deal with all the eventualities. You have to work to make sure that as you go, you're dealing with it well. So how do you avoid the rocks? What are the most obvious rocks right now that you want to avoid? And the things which people talk about, one is regulation. And this is going back to the question of public buy-in, right? Regulation in some countries is taken for granted, and some countries is seen as an evil. And I won't name any countries in particular, but the European regulations, and here I think I have a quote here. This is California. I'll come back to Europe in a minute. So this is a bill in California saying it requires them to fulfill transparency requirements and report safety incidents, publish public documents, best practices, a pathway to report incidents. It's all procedural. It doesn't say what AI should do or how you should control what it does. It says, how can we at least see what the effects are? How can we post hoc see what it's done so that we can then hopefully feed that back into the reason? So that's one approach to regulation. You can regulate post hoc. The European one, this is from the EU a couple of years ago, less than a couple at this point still, and it says the AI prohibits, okay, so now we're not post hoc. This is don't do it. Harmful AI-based manipulation and deception. Individual, well, you can read them. I won't read them out to you. And in a way, this is much more enforceable, right? I mean, it's much more, you can say, okay, if you do social scoring, but in a way it isn't, because first of all, each of these terms, what makes manipulation and deception harmful? I mean, if I say I'm not going to be here tomorrow when I really am, is that harmful deception? Is that whatever? I mean, it's just, again, it's, the message which I just keep coming back to is these are all human things which require human understanding. They're not the kind of thing which you can legislate and say, okay, here's the law which says this is harmful and that's not harmful. Harmful to whom? Harmful how much? I mean, it's good direction in the sense that it makes you think about these things, but it's not good enforcement. It's not something you can say, okay, if we could only enforce these, we would be happy with what AI does. Alignment, I've never liked the term alignment, but it has the obvious problem, which I've talked about, which is it says we want to align AI with human values without saying, what's a human value? Which humans? Are there values that are so universal that every human believes in them in the same way? The answer is no. I mean, we can say preserving life is a human value, but if you say, does every society completely prohibit anything which doesn't preserve life? The answer is no. No, we have death penalty, we have exceptions for war and self-defense and da-da, da-da, da-da. You say, so trying to come up with a notion of human value which we could align the AI with, just strikes me as unrealistic. I just watched a Zoom yesterday. It was here at Stanford. They held it with Tom Friedman. Many of you know, he's a journalist who writes about politics, and Craig Mundy, who was the head of technology for Microsoft for many years. He's now left Microsoft, and they had this idea they were trying to persuade people of, that there should be this universal, transparent, agreed upon view of what the AIs shouldn't do, what's aligned with human values. And anybody who has an AI has to agree, if they want to be legal and allowed online, to feed their results through this universal thing. It's fantasy. If you could do it, of course. But the idea that there is such a list, that values can be listed and checked off and so on, it's just a very naive view of human response. So I want to quote from, again, something a number of years ago. John Hoagland, I mentioned at the beginning, coined the term good old-fashioned AI for the representational rational AI. He was a philosopher, worked with Bert Dreyfus, as a matter of fact, to draw connections. It was University of Pittsburgh. And his famous quote is, "The trouble with artificial intelligence is the computers don't give a damn." And there's like you see essays about giving a damn. But if you just from a simple, simplistic view, what does that mean? It means if I say something to you and it's true or it's false, I give a damn as to whether it's true or false and whether you believe it. I mean, I've got skin in the game, literally physical skin, but metaphorically, right? I care because I'm engaged. If Chat GPT says the same thing, it doesn't give a damn, right? It's just that's the next set of tokens that came out. And I mean, I like to say that people think that hallucinations are a problem with LLMs, but everything they do is a hallucination. There's no reality behind it. It's some hallucinations are closer to what we think are true and some aren't, right? Like, but in the end, there's no ground truth based on caring about what's going on or about being engaged in what's going on. It's all putting out strings of tokens based on previous strings of tokens. So for me, this is the key. And the problem is it's hard to operationalize, right? So going back to the word care, caring is not something we have, like values we can list. It's something we do and something we are. And I would argue that ChatGPT doesn't do it or is it be it, whatever the right formulation is not something you can just add by saying, okay, we'll give it a constitution at the beginning and that'll be full of values and therefore those values will find their way into the solutions. Caring is our basic orientation, the way we find ourselves already involved with things that matter to us. Before we ever step back to reflect, okay, that's the logical part, we're already caring, already engaged, already tending to what calls to us. And this is what's missing completely from AI, including all of the modern versions. It was missing of the Sherdlu as well. Sherdlu didn't care if it picked up a block. But it's missing in spite of all the advances and appearances of caring, right? So when Emma said, Graham really cares and loves me, there's appearance that there was caring going on there. But it was just, a program that put out words that it came from the thing. So how do we navigate the uses of AI? Not the technology so much as how we choose to apply it and not apply it in a way that respects the place of human caring. So going back to this question that I raised at the very beginning, what does it mean to be human? First of all, life with intrinsic uncertainty. Don't assume that you can logically figure it all out and you got it right. And this pervasive foundation of care. And what to do about it, when I saw a chat notice go by on the screen, thank you, whoever it was who put that in, that said, well, you could have people take courses like this one. And I think for me, education is a big key, right? It's not like we're going to come up with, quote, a solution. We need to find ways to shift the social understanding and the social discourse about these issues. And that's, as somebody who's been in the university all my career, something I think of as the job of people who educate. And that's, again, coming back to the beginning, why I'm so pleased that this class exists and why I'm able to participate, because I think that is the way we approach these problems as opposed to coming up with a formal solution. Having said that, I'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. Now it's open for questions. Gustavo, please ask your question and open your camera.
So let me see if my camera's open. Oh, okay. Oh, not yet. Give me 1 second, please.
It's okay. Go ahead.
So my question is actually I'm concerned about when you say about go with flow. I can't explain why. I understand when you say that, but I'm concerned about this. Sorry?
There was a glitch in the sound. Say it again.
It's fine. I understand when you say go with the flow.
Yeah.
However, I'm concerned about this. I'm gonna tell you why. In university, school, they taught me how to think. They taught me how to open a lot of books to have one solution, and I had to do it because I didn't have computer, I didn't have AI to do everything for me. So I can see nowadays a lot of people who doesn't know how to write even an email. I'm not thinking about letter because they don't know how to do it. It's very simple. They are using social media. They are using AI, so it's very simple. Everything is very simple, and that's my concern because when I say there's no coming back when we talk about AI, right? We have to go with the flow, but with caution. Uh, to use ethic, however, what ethic means for each individual person, and that's the problem as well because we have to use with caution, we have to use with thinking about how to use, thinking about. So, what do you think about? I'm gonna connect ethic with what you said about AI and all problems. How do you envision our future, for instance, if we don't take care of communication better, education better, ethic? How do you envision our future? Yes, this is where we are right now, right? This is what we are living, and this is exactly what we are experiencing, right?
Um, Let me put up my last slide, which I forgot to bring up. So are you seeing it now?
Yes.
What's interesting about this slide, right? These are the people who just came down that river. Uh, it's a group doing it together. And I think one of the important things about how do you do this are not um, what can I by myself individually do, but how do we find the right connections and the right way to work as a team? Because they got through because they were all paddling at the right time in the right direction together with coordination. And I'm a very social as opposed to individualistic oriented person. So the question is really how do you create the environments where people will join together to then think about these issues and learn about these issues and do them in a way that doesn't reduce the humanity. And as you said, it's very easy to just let chat do everything for you. That's the Claude boys, right? You don't need to do anything. It'll take care of it for you. You just have to type it in, right? And I think that's a danger. And I think we need to, when you're face to face with somebody, it's much harder to do that than it is when you're typing on a message. And I think that there's a huge role for individual interpersonal interaction and group interpersonal interaction as a countervailing force to this kind of isolation.
Thank you for the questions. Next question is from Muhammad Sikha.
Thank you for the lecture and sharing your insights. It's always interesting to join these sessions. I have a couple of questions, but I just will ask the first one, and if there was any time left, I will shoot the other ones. So we discussed a lot about individualism and social fabric. This is not something that's being discussed right now, as we see in the society. Everybody is having their own personalized experience, and they're happy with that. My question is, where do you see the role of user experience, design thinking into providing services that promotes that individualism in the society?
So I'm not sure of the direction here, but let me think about it some, which is you're saying the design thinking is promoting individualism, or we could do a kind of design thinking which promoted social interaction. And the answer is both, but what's the difference between design which starts with the user? When I got into the area of human computer interaction, it was here's a person, here's a machine, they're interacting with each other, and that's the whole picture. Nowadays, when you pick up a journal on human computer interaction, it's all about social. It's about because we don't interact with the computer, we interact through a computer. and with mediation by computers with other people and historic and everything that's ever been put on the web and all that stuff. So I think that if you say let's start the design not from the point of view of what just is this individual thing, but what is the larger impact, the larger experience that it's designing, then that becomes a major part. There's Don Norman, who many of you have probably read, who did one of the original thinkers in human-computer interaction, has a recent book. Do I have it on my shelf fast enough to get? Hold on. Yeah, no, not fast enough. Anyway, it's here on my shelf somewhere, but it's designing for the world, not designing for the user. And it's really thinking about that larger interaction space.
A follow-up. During the slides, you mentioned we are benchmarking this artificial intelligence with human intelligence, where user experience is kind of advocating the processes that reduces cognitive load into the human-computer interaction. So where do you see that logic, that kind of equation will fit into this discussion, where should we really care about reducing the cognitive load into a point that we think that a calculator is even smarter than a human? Is that a good benchmark? Or yeah.
Right. I mean, a couple of different issues there, but one is calculators are better than humans at some tasks, right? So you have to scope it. Okay, multiplying big numbers, no question. Calculators are smarter than humans. That gets back to the question I raised very early on, is there's no such thing as what intelligence is as a unified thing. We think of intelligence as a big complex of things, and our example is people have that complex, and other things have pieces of it or other parts and so on. What's amazing about the current thing is that it can simulate many, many parts of that, which is why it feels like it's more, excuse me. But I think, well, going back to the first question, I lost the track there with my coughing, but we need to be designing with that larger picture in mind. I saw that Daniel actually put the link to the book into the chat. So if you're interested in it, that's you can find it.
Thank you. Let's move to the next question from Kai. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Mike first. Mike.
Sorry, took a minute for my computer to respond there. Yeah, I've got a question. First of all, human intelligence and sentience, etc. It's not monolithic, but the discussion around AI typically treats human intelligence as if it's well understood, well defined, standardized. So shouldn't we be starting with defining what constitutes human intelligence and the various degrees of that apply? And somewhat related to that, your example of the Claude boys honestly could be, I think, could be compared to many humans now and down through history who've lived their lives in close and continuous reference to religious texts. These humans are often treated as admirable, but is it really any different?
Well, I think, let me just answer that last one. I think it's different in the accelerant kind, which is you can't ask a religious text, what should I tell my neighbor about his tree or whatever. You can look in the text and people will give you interpretations. Well, because there's this story about this. And so it gives you a reference point. But the appeal of AI really is that it doesn't just give you references, it gives you the answers, sometimes based on false references, right? That's another question. So I mean, I think there is a continuity there, but it's a different level. Remind me the first part of your question.
The first part was that human intelligence itself and sentience is not monolithic.
Right. So
right. We haven't properly measured it and standardized it and
That's right. So
There's different degrees in my mind.
A lot of you probably run across the work about multiple intelligences. There's a guy at Harvard whose name I can't think of at the moment who did, I'm sure you can find it, Daniel. You're good at finding things. The book on multiple kinds of intelligence. So he talked about IQ and EQ for emotional and so on, and spatial. I mean, if you talk about any person you know, you can say, well, they're good at this, but not good at that. They're still a person. They're still intelligence, right? And so it's just not a simple, it's not a quantity, a metric quantity. It is a characterization that we make of activity, of things you do. If you come up with the answer to a question, I say, oh, you're intelligent. Well, I used to give this example years and years ago before there were chat, which I write a program and you type in, what year did Columbus sail to America? And it types out 1492. Is it intelligent? If a person did that, you might say, well, it's a kind of intelligence, but it could just be that I programmed in that question and that answer, right? You never know. So you can't measure intelligence in this sort of simple yes, no way. And then the question is, what are we doing when we attribute intelligence? There's an interesting book by a guy named Justin Lieber called Can Machines and Animals Think? And he has a story. This book is not a philosophy treatise. It's a short story, basically, about there's a monkey that was sent into space for scientific experimentation and is orbiting the Earth. And there's another satellite, which they have an AI computer, which has gone up, been put into orbit and is there. And for various reasons, they need to deorbit these satellites. And there's an argument in court as to whether it's legitimate, whether it's murder to just bring the satellite down and kill the monkey in the case, or decommission the AI. You can say kill the AI, and that's part of the discussion, right? What is it about them? And you can say, well, are they intelligent? Monkeys are intelligent, more than dogs, probably. It's an argument you can have, certainly more than mice or something. AI, you can say is intelligent, but what effect does that have on how we treat them? If you say if it's intelligent, then we shouldn't kill it, that's a very different thing from just saying, let's measure intelligence. And, the answer in the book is it's a very open-ended question. It's not like, oh, the real intelligence is such and such.
Thank you, Mike, for your questions. Next, Kai.
Good evening, Terry. One of the articles that our professor had made us read at the beginning of the course was why technology favors tyranny, and basically the thrust of it is how artificial intelligence will help concentrate power to a small upper class group of elite unless society takes actions to stop it. In your presentation, you alluded to that a couple of times. You referenced quotes where you mentioned that AI is not going to eliminate all jobs and all professions, but it will make a small number of people ultra rich and it will make the general public generally poor. I guess my question is this, should society at large, and when I say society, I reference it in a Western cultural context, should society take steps to try to regulate or automate to regulate AI, or should we allow the free market to run wild with this, where we see so many numerous examples in today's context where people don't use it for good purposes?
So the question is technology versus the uses of technology. So you can regulate the technology itself, but that tends to be a very blunt weapon and it doesn't really sort out good from bad. So if you say you can't, take the obvious, you can't use fake pictures to make your political argument, or you can't make fake pictures of kids having sex, whatever it is. There's arguments about that a lot right now. Then you can regulate the uses, right? You really regulate the way people employ it, deploy it. However, and this goes back to that quote that I had about fake pictures, there's a financial motivation, right? So decisions about what will get done in technology are not based on some wise planetary committee deciding what's good for people. It's on the decisions of a lot of individual companies deciding what's going to make them money. And if you say, well, is technology always going to lead to tyranny? You have to ask the question, does the concentration of wealth lead to tyranny? And does the concentration of wealth control the way the AI gets built? So it's intermediated by the questions of wealth and power. It's not a question just of technology and tyranny by themselves.
Maybe just as like a super quick follow up, and as an example, take Elon Musk, world's richest man, and his constant manipulations of Grok. I'm sure you're probably familiar. Where a few months back he quote unquote tweaked it because he felt it was too politically correct, and then it started espousing Mecha Hitler references. But here you have arguably the world, one of the world's most powerful persons, if not the most powerful, directly attempting to influence the state of U.S. Politics, using his power, using his leverage, and using his artificial intelligence, Grok, to achieve those ends.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Elon Musk. A couple of things about him. One is he uses all of it, right? I mean, he gives plain cash donations to politics to try to affect politics. Nothing to do with AI, except to the extent it's helping make him rich. But it's classical, having money and getting power. He tries to shape what can go on in AI. He hasn't yet bought his newspaper, but a lot of the other guys have bought newspapers and shape what they do, or TV broadcast companies. I mean, it's that whole world of media is a big question. He may be at the point, and this may be true with Grok, it's certainly true with Trump, which is one of the arguments in this webinar I heard today was that large scale wealth creates a distortion field. The person who's in it doesn't see the world in the same way. And I think at this point, Musk can't possibly care about income on Grok. I mean, I'm sure at some level he always does. He's a business guy, but he's got so much money and so many other sources of money that whether Grok makes or loses money is just not driving it. So then it becomes vanity and becomes, psychological satisfaction for the owner, and crazy things get done. I mean, I'm not sure who's crazier. I won't Musk or Trump, but in any case, putting a rational, what are they trying to get out of it on it is just doesn't explain it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mount. Next, Oliski.
Yes,
Oh.
thank you very much. Sure, if I can do so long now. Good evening.
Yes.
Yes, so I'll ask pretty much brief question. So I believe the previous person was asking about worthy or not worthy to regulate the AI. So my question would belong to the same field. The development of AI is pretty much can be compared to development of nuclear weapons. And my question is, shouldn't it be conscious to simply start regulating it in benefit of survival, or we still should allow like free development of this technology and thinking that human will be simply like smart enough to not destroy themselves?
I'm not sure I followed the full question, but let me make a comment about nuclear weapons and AI. There's a couple of major differences about how you think about them societally. One is that nuclear weapons, because of the technology involved, require huge concentrations of technological power and money. And you can sort of cut off some of the, you can actually control like the sources of fissional material and, mess up the centrifuges or whatever it is. Whereas AI is way too distributed for that. I mean, there's no way to say, here's the pinch points where you could stop AI. It's just going to happen. The other is, I think there's a huge psychological difference, which is the effects of nuclear weapons are immediate, visible, and concentrated, right? I mean, boom, city's gone. Whereas the effects of AI are more pervasive and maybe worse in some ways for society, but are much less visible and much harder to agree upon because they are areas of human social. I mean, there's nothing social about a nuclear weapon except what it kills, but the structure of what it does is physics. And the structure of what AI does is not physics or computer science. It's the impact it has on the social structure. And I think it's hard to get people to see that as something they need to control, whereas things like weapons are.
Thank you. Due to the time limits, next question will be the last question. The next question from Yolanda.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great lecture and so full of information. And really, you took us back in time quite a bit. And my question is, are we perhaps too late with this AI safety and ethics considerations? Because, like you said, it's already out there, right? So how do we really back in now and do it right? I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's certainly too late for a quick fix. I mean, if you want to say, what could we do? I mean, there are certain things in the world where before it goes wrong, you say, okay, let's have a preventive, whatever it is. That was sort of true with nuclear weapons agreements and so on, although limited success. But we're not going to have that kind of result. So then the question is, what's the long fix, not the quick fix? And I think that's never too late in the sense that society, goes through the rocks and things happen and change. But I think we need to get into the mindset of how do we shift our societal expectations, that's political and social, that's not technological, such that the context for technology doesn't have these horrible effects. And social change is slow. It's not something you just say, okay, can we do it today? It's something you need to work on in political change and so on. So it's not too late, but it's not going to be easy.
That's a perfect question. Thanks for Yolanda for your wonderful question for ending this wonderful guest lecture. So it's not going to be easy fix. That's why we are here in this program and taking this AI ethics class. That one part of, as a computer professional can do. And thank you so much, Professor Terry, again for your third or fourth guest lecture to my student. And thank you, Professor Daniel, for your introduction. And thank you, everyone, both students in my class and people outside the class and the people outside University of Ottawa. So we look forward, is it possible for next future that we could have you back again with us?
Okay, we'll see if the world has changed enough.
Yes, thank you. So this is the end of our special guest lecture by Professor Terry Winograd. So myself would like to thank you so much for your participation today.